Welcome to Significant Brothers. I'm Brad.
I'm Chase.
And I'm Cray.
Tucked behind a marsh in West Michigan is a windmill. No, not those industrial-sized poles you find in a cornfield, but an authentic Dutch windmill, where the Dutch flag waves high and proud and is untouched by time.
If you were here during the Tulip Festival, there would be tulips painting the landscape. Men and women dressed in Dutch garb, and nearly everyone would make their way towards the island's namesake, the grain mill Zwaan.
It's the same process. So essentially the grain is going to go into the center of the stone. It's called the eye. And the bottom stone is stationary while the upper stone moves. So obviously in that set, one set is mounted on one side and only one moves.
That's Alisa Crawford, grain miller extraordinaire and author of the book Zwaan, The True Story of America's Dutch Windmill. But if we are looking for official titles, she is the miller of Zwaan, certified by and inducted into, and pardon my Dutch, the Ambachtelijk Kornmolenaars Gilde.
And that's the Ambachtelijk Kornmolenaars Gilde.
The Grain Millers Guild of the Netherlands. She's the only American in the guild, and not only that, she's the only woman.
I'm part of the guild in the Netherlands, the Ambachtelijk Kornmolenaars Gilde, or the AKG. But it's a guild, a professional traditional grain millers guild, 44 Dutchmen and myself. So I was just reading email this morning, and all of them are over there, and I'm the only one outside in the Netherlands. So it's a little hard because I'm removed from the rest of the group. So I tell them I run the satellite operation here in America. But with phone and email, you're not too far away. I just wish I could participate more often.
The mill has been standing in Holland for over 50 years now. It is an icon of the town's history, or at least it was after a local businessman, Carter Brown, who had a love for the community of Holland, reached the conclusion that Holland's identity as a town with Dutch heritage wasn't complete until it had an authentic Dutch windmill.
Carter Brown enlisted the help of a local second-generation Dutchman, Willard C. Wickers. He was the director of the Midwest Office of the Netherlands Information Service, which ensured trade between the Netherlands and Holland.
Brown formed a committee of leaders in the community, which included Wickers. It was 1962, Project Windmill was in effect. Their goal was singular: get a windmill for Holland.
It was nothing short of a miracle on both sides of the Atlantic that this all happened. Because for them in the Netherlands to finally agree, even though they'd already passed the law in 61, to allow one final windmill to leave the Netherlands, that was a miracle in itself.
The lack of upkeep on these decaying relics meant a loss of identity for the Dutch. The Netherlands were losing their cultural heritage due to damage from World War II and abandonment.
In response, the Netherlands passed a law banning the exportation of windmills from the country in 1961. Despite knowing about the law, Wickers wrote to Dutch officials explaining Holland's desire for an authentic Dutch windmill.
Initially, the ambassador of the Netherlands responded to Wickers in a letter saying, "Don't do it. Save your money and don't come here." Wickers, however, stood steadfast. Besides, the money had already been raised. Failure was not an option at this point.
So, on May 5th, 1962, Wickers stepped aboard an aircraft to negotiate the exportation of a Dutch windmill. Wickers spent his time talking with various officials and ministers on the prospects of acquiring a windmill.
The result was this. Wickers felt confident that he would get approval, but first he had to secure a suitable site for the windmill. After more correspondence, Wickers received great news on January 30, 1963.
Frederick Stockhausen, the president of the Dutch Mill Society, officially approved the request for a mill. The letter read, "Without any doubt, we may say that this will be the only mill that will be expedited from here to America, and we hope that you'll feel happy in the idea that you'll possess then the only original Dutch windmill in the United States."
By June, they only had 11 months to acquire, transport, and reassemble Zwaan, and build Windmill Island, the Windmills' new home.
In the Dutch countryside in the province of North Brabant lives a small village called Winkel. For about 80 years, the Zwaan called it home. After World War II, however, it suffered major blows. Its owner, Van Schaik, could not afford to repair the mill himself, nor could he procure the funds from the government for restoration.
Without many options, he sold the mill to the firm Gebroeders Adrians. The firm's investment paid off, and in good ceremonious fashion, Wickers clasped the hands of Anne Shake on June 11, 1964, thus signifying the deal.
Because nobody really thought about in Holland, Michigan, what it did to that town that got left behind when we took their mill.
No ceremony to celebrate it.
No, it was more like a funeral than it was, a celebration. It was celebration here. They did a parade down 8th Street of mill parts. People like, where's the mill? And it's like trucks with mill parts, and they were expecting to see a full-size built mill. And no. But in Winkel, yeah, I was like their good friend leaving. And when I was there a year ago in November, and I was there for the groundbreaking, one of the guys there explained it to me this way. They said it was like ripping the heart out of our community. That's painful.
Now that the windmill was in ownership of the city of Holland, they needed to get the mill from Winkel out of the Netherlands across the Atlantic to Michigan in Holland. The Dutch Mill Society recommended Deke Medendorp to take the mill apart. He was like the Frank Lloyd Wright of deconstructing mills. Plus, he knew some English, which came in handy when working in Michigan.
But then to take that and to mobilize quickly, to get it shipped over here, and as you said, get it, reconstructed in a short 6 months during the hard, cold winter is unbelievable. And then it was ready to be dedicated on April 10th by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, and they did it. They accomplished it. It's amazing. So I feel like that in itself, the fulfillment of a dream of Holland, Michigan, to have an authentic Dutch windmill here is really, truly remarkable. That alone is a wonderful story.
April 10th, 1965. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands visited Holland for the christening of the windmill. On the newly opened Windmill Island, Prince Bernhard presented Carter Brown, the man who spearheaded this initiative, with a map of the Zwaan district, the believed origins of the Zwaan.
Now, what do you mean believed origins?
We'll get to that later. In addition to the treasured map, Prince Bernhard also presented Carter Brown with a bottle of water from the Zwaan River, for as the prince put, the Zwaan would always be near some part of its homeland.
Wickers had previously written to the officials in the Zwaan district requesting a bottle of water from the Zwaan River so as to christen it. Like a captain would christen a ship.
The only thing is, that's not how windmills are christened. Typically, speeches are given and good favors exchanged, but no water is poured out. The brakes are released and the blades are given a chance to spin.
The officials in Zwaan obliged Wickers with his request on the condition that they don't christen it with water so as not to embarrass the prince.
Windmills, when you work on them for a while, they feel a lot like ships, and so I think it was probably a natural idea of when they were going to dedicate the mill, well, we should christen it like a ship, right? And so having the water from the Zwaan, from where they thought the windmill was from, was a great idea, but that's not how windmills are dedicated. So I'm glad that somebody, interceded and said, no, it's done another way. And so then it was handled more appropriately, which is good. I get mill magazines from the Netherlands all the time, and I see lots of photos of them dedicating mills, and it's not with a bottle of water.
All in all, through their grand opening and tulip time, 40,000 people made their pilgrimage to Windmill Island and to Zwaan. Days after tulip time, there was a special viewing of film footage that was being taken during Operation Windmill. Arie de Koning, technical advisor to the Mill Society, and Deke Medendorp were there for a Q&A. Most importantly, de Koning presented an ornate scroll to Holland, which was accepted by Carter Brown.
Had Carter Brown not walked into Bill Worker's office that hot August afternoon in 1961 and said, Bill, we need a windmill, the project would never have begun. And even Mr. Workers kind of said, well, I don't think that's possible. They passed a law, and he was in touch with all those things. He knew. That was his job, as director of the Midwest Division of the Netherlands Information Service. And he said, it's impossible to get a windmill here, And Carter Brown wasn't willing to accept that. He said, no, there's got to be a way. We have to have a real windmill here, from the Netherlands. So together, then they began pursuing it and formed the Windmill Committee, and then the ball started rolling. But I feel like it took those two together.
Deke Menendorp spent a considerable amount of time in Holland after the grand opening because Holland didn't have a miller themselves. The new miller who apprenticed under Menendorp was Maynard Skroenboer.
But the years came and went, as did the millers, and that's how we came to talking to Alisa Crawford, a miller who has spent her fair share of time in mills.
It was my own motivation and my own goal setting because, honestly, I do believe what Abraham Lincoln said once, which is whatever you are, be a good one. It doesn't matter if you're a plumber, painter, or president, or a miller or mechanic. Be good at what you do. And sometimes that means you have to go to great lengths to accomplish that. Sometimes you have to travel halfway around the world and learn another language. I did. But if you don't push yourself, you won't accomplish. And life's short. If you miss it, you're going to regret you didn't do more. So sometimes you have to just do things yourself. And I'm glad I did.
Crawford's interest for milling started in her teen years when she was able to operate the water-powered Atlas Mill in a historical village just north of Flint, Michigan. Through her first years at Windmill Island, she was trained by a volunteer miller.
And one year, a Dutch engineer vacationed in Holland and took a tour of Zwaan. Alisa had 2 questions for him.
I said, number one, are there any lady millers like me back in the Netherlands? I wanted to know if I had a counterpart, on the other side of the ocean who did what I do. So I really want to know that. The second was, I said, I understand you've got a really good training program for millers. I'd like to know more about that.
He connected Alisa with 2 female Dutch millers, Achie Vloetman and Josin de Vries. Both of them helped coordinate the effort to get Alisa proper Dutch training through the Dutch Mill Society.
Even though she was furthering her experience, she didn't have the opportunity to partake in a formal miller training program. Besides, she said, I'm an American. It's a 2-year program and I have a young child.
Aki reassured Alisa and said she would ask on her behalf. This was the first time the Guild of Millers and the Dutch Mill Society had a request from someone across the pond. Eventually, they let her in, but she had to gain 150 hours of training under Dutch certified millers.
But there was one small catch.
What was that?
The program wasn't Dutch, so she undertook an intensive study of the language while also studying the subject material for the exam. Achie came to Holland for a month, and another miller interrupted his vacation to help her work on those hours. After it was all said and done, she passed, becoming the first Dutch certified miller in the Americas.
It really was a gift that she gave me, both in asking and then also coming here, to help train. She made another trip over as well to help prepare me for my exam. And I'm so grateful that there's people like her willing to do that. Because, yes, it's good to set goals and it's great to accomplish them, but the other thing is you don't get there alone. There's people along the way that will help you. Sometimes you have to ask, but they're there to help you, especially if you're on the right path, because they'll come into your life at the right time, at the right moment to help you get where you want to go. And she was one of those wonderful people, so I'm really grateful.
Most people would have stopped there and have been satisfied, but Achie Vloetman said, now you need to go on for the professional level for grain millers.
Alisa, never one to walk away from a challenge, started the professional program in 2008. In 2009, through more vigorous study, she passed the qualifying exam. But not only that, she got the high score.
I can't not pass. They only give it once a year. I'd have to wait a whole nother year. I'd have to scrape together the money again to fly over and take that test. So I thought I have to do this. I mean, sometimes you really just dig deep and you figure out what you're made of and what you can really accomplish. And so I was happy to find out at the end of that week I did pass, but I wasn't prepared for the next response that I got. After I was home, and we were in the midst of tulip time, and you can imagine how hectic it is at tulip time, and I got an email from them that said, Alisa, we thought you would like to know that you not only passed, but you took the high score. And so out of the 16 of us, 2 men didn't pass, and then out of the 14, then I took the high score. But that's okay. They don't know that. I'm happy I passed.
She's now a journeyman in the Grain Millers Guild, and in 2019, she'll be promoted to the Master Miller level.
I do believe in you need to know where you came from. You need to know who you are. You need to know what your ancestors, what their stories were, because their stories are also part of your story. And just like with this windmill, it helped me to know what was its story. Where did it come from? What does it live through? And what can it teach us today? And I was so glad to have a chance to do that through writing the book.
But Crawford found out there's a twist into Zwaan's history.
A twist?
Yeah, well, everyone used to think that Zwaan was from the Zwaan district in North Holland, hence the water from the Zwaan River. But she found out something that Bill Wickers knew all along. The windmill wasn't from the Zwaan district. In fact, the windmill was a hybrid of two much older mills from the early 19th century.
And it wasn't even from North Holland. The multiple parts were taken from places closer to Winkel, so the water from the Zwaan River was completely irrelevant.
After this realization and the inaugural dedication of Zwaan, Bill Wickers wrote, "It may be more prudent to submit this new evidence at a later date, when the announcement would be less devastating."
I understood within that context why he made those choices at that time. And in that moment, in that context, it made sense. And that's why I felt like, he did what he needed to do in that moment. But he left what I needed to have 50 years later. And it was almost like a prophecy, because he said, at a later date, we will, discuss this more or continue the research, or it's like he left a little bit of the door open. And what a blessing for me to get to come along and fulfill that 50 years later, the trail that Bill Wickers left. And I felt so honored to get to kind of finish that work that he had started, because he was a really remarkable man that accomplished so much during his lifetime.
And that information did come to surface 50 years later with the publication of Zwaan. Crawford, however, argues that this isn't devastating, but interesting. The history is rich, and at this later date, people are quite willing to accept this new-founded history. Despite Zwaan being a mutt, it is still America's authentic Dutch mill.
We'd like to thank Alisa Crawford for taking time out of her day to speak with us. Her book, Zwaan, is concise, straightforward, and a fun read. You can find it in local bookstores in Holland or look for it on Amazon.
Hey, thanks for listening. You can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Podbean. Just search Significant Brothers.
And you can tweet us at Significant Bros. If you want to email us, it's sigbrothers.pod@gmail.com.
And if you want to keep up on all of our significant happenings, you can subscribe to our newsletter at tinyletter.com/significantbrothers.